Thank you. Great to be back. There are so many things in our lives that I think transform us and change us and move us, and you might be in one of those right now. One of my most transforming events happened in 1985. I spent a little bit of time in prison, and at Florida State Penitentiary specifically. It was one of those things that happened where I learned a lot about human nature. One of the things that got me interested in human nature was spending time in prison. And I learned both good and bad about people while I was there in prison. I was there doing a documentary on capital punishment. So many of you are looking so concerned, like we had this guy in our midst the whole time, and who knew? He's a serial killer. Ah! So I was there in Florida State Penitentiary and doing a documentary on capital punishment at the time, and I met lots of people on death row, and it was a kind of an interesting, as you can imagine, very interesting time that gave me a lot of perspective on a lot of different things. It changed the trajectory of my life for a lot of reasons. But one of the most interesting things that I was met with was one man who was on death row, who was also in a twin study. On a twin study, they were looking for genomic, the gene kind of expression between twins, what behaviors were actually genetically endowed and which were not. And of course, where would you go but to look at identical twins? And so that was happening at the time, and this guy on death row had been there because he committed a particularly heinous crime, as you can imagine, a murder that you can imagine. And he was there, and he was asked a lot of different questions about why it is that he believed that he ended up at that space in his life. So they'd done lots and lots of different testing, but that question in particular was a very interesting question because of how he answered it. And he said, "I am here on death row, and that's easy to explain because of this. Me and my brother, we grew up with my daddy. He was a single father. He was a drug addict. He abused alcohol, and he abused us every single day. He would find us from the time that we were little. He would find us, and he would beat us. He would break bones. We were bloody. It was an everyday kind of thing. And what I learned was the only way to survive was to hit back. And eventually, I became very violent, and this is what you get." That's how he explained his life. They went and they interviewed his brother as well, who is an investment banker. He might be a CA like Bonnie, but he's a, who knows? But he's an investment banker, and they asked him the same questions, and when they asked him the question, why is it that you believe that you ended up in the place that you're in your life, an identical twin? Where you are in your life, what was your answer? And he answered almost the same thing. He said, because growing up, me and my brother grew up with a single dad, abused drugs, alcohol, beat every single day, broken bones, bloody every single day. And then when we went to kindergarten, our first year of school, we were deemed too aggressive and too violent to be placed in the same school together because we would just beat up on kids all over the place. And so they pulled us apart and put us into different schools. And on one day, I was smashing this kid's face into the playground. And I was smashing his face as hard as I could when my teacher came upon me, and she went to go grab me. And I will never forget the look on her face. Ms. Greenow was her name, and she was so incredibly angry as she looked at me. And I looked at her like I would look at any adult going to grab me, as I am in a bad space where I was. And I did to her what I would do to any adult who would grab me, and that is I kicked her as hard as I possibly could. And I just kicked her leg and literally caused her shin to be bloody. And she was so angry, and she picked me up, and she pulled me in. And this guy, he kicked and kicked and kicked. She grabbed his legs, grabbed his arms, and she pulled him in, and she whispered into his ear. And she said, when we hurt, we don't hit, we hug. And every single day and every time that you feel angry and you feel mad, I want you to find me while you're at school, and I want you to find me, and I